The rising tensions between Ukraine and Belarus, with the Belarusian army, about a third of its army, now positioned along the border, and Wagner seasoned campaigners threading their way through those troops, uh, the armored vehicles with a great big B painted on their side. It's not clear whether this is an army preparing to invade Ukraine. It doesn't really have the capacity or the experience to be an invasion force. Possibly it's there to attract attention, to present enough of a threat that Ukraine has to waste its troops guarding the border. Provocation. Possibly it's a last-ditch attempt to support the buddy Putin. It's not at all clear, but there's definitely a military build-up, and Ukraine has issued a stern warning to Belarus, urging it to withdraw its troops from the border and cease what Kyiv calls unfriendly actions. And this warning comes amid reports of a significant Belarusian military deployment, including special operations forces, as well as the Wagner mercenaries near the Ukrainian border, under the guise, it says, of military exercises. Ukraine views these actions as being orchestrated by Moscow, with Belarus acting under Kremlin pressure as Putin's poodle to create a new front in the conflict against Ukraine. And Kyiv has made it clear that any violation of its borders by Belarus would lead to a strong military response, with Belarusian troop concentrations and infrastructure becoming legitimate targets for Ukrainian forces. And of course, Lukashenko relies on the army to keep his position and to crack down, as he does, on his own civilians. The situation is further complicated by the proximity of Belarusian military activity to sensitive areas such as the Chernobyl power plant, raising concerns about broader regional and global security. Belarus, under President Alexander Lukashenko, claims that its troop movements are defensive in response to what it describes as aggressive actions by Ukraine. In July it was talking about air defense, including alleged troop buildups and drone activities near the border. However, Kyiv dismisses these claims, pointing out that Belarus has consistently supported Russia's military invasion of Ukraine, including allowing Russian forces to use its territory as a launch pad for attacks. This escalating tension at the Belarus-Ukrainian border could potentially open up a new theatre of conflict in the ongoing war, further complicating the situation for both Kyiv and Moscow, but also opening up the option with a second country involved in aggressive activity against Ukraine. That changes, I think, the dynamic of the Western terms of support for Ukraine. For Ukraine, the threat from Belarus could force a diversion of resources and attention away from other critical fronts, but it will also lead almost certainly to greater support from the West. If support has to go up to the Belarusian front, then it will take away soldiers from the Donbass region and recent incursions into Russia's Kursk region. That probably is the intention. And meanwhile, for Belarus, deeper involvement in the war could lead to significant domestic and international consequences, especially if its actions are seen as directly contributing to the conflict. The situation underscores the volatile and interconnected nature of the conflict in Eastern Europe, where actions by one state can quickly escalate into broader regional tensions with potentially catastrophic consequences. I think we also have to keep our eye on Iran's engagement with Israel, because, again, the finger of Putin, whether alive or dead, is very much in that mix. And the involvement of Belarus under Russian influence adds another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation, making diplomatic solutions increasingly difficult to achieve. And of course, as Colin Robertson was saying, it is now Russia which is firmly saying it won't engage in diplomacy and in negotiations for peace, whereas the illusion that Russia had been putting out for the last 2 years is that it was Ukraine that was defying the efforts towards peace. Now the truth emerges. Now it becomes much harder for the Putin puppet propaganda to continue to trump out ideas that Ukraine is the defiant actor in this in this search for peace, or indeed the old trope that Boris Johnson is behind Zelensky's chair, puppeteering him. There was only one puppet in the story, and that's Liz Truss, who was puppeteered by chaos and madness. And I think a lot of the damage in the early days could possibly have been averted had we got a foreign minister who was competent. We didn't, and we have to accept the consequences of that. But I think we could have done a great deal to stop this conflict even occurring had we got significantly more competent diplomatic forces poised and ready to deal with Sergei Lavrov and the forces of Putin and the Kremlin. Whoever deals with Putin now needs to deal with a regime which is defensive and highly suspicious of any proposals, I think. But that shouldn't stop our efforts. We have good reason to engage in diplomatic conversations with Russia because we have imposed sanctions. We can lift them, and we can intensify those sanctions. And on the basis of that, we should be engaging in direct conversations with the Kremlin at this moment on our own behalf. And whether that could lead eventually to negotiations between Ukraine and Russia is another matter entirely. I think there is a part of the Russian elite that is keen to end this war. And we've already heard of individual oligarchs and key military strategists and military officers who are calling for Putin's resignation and who are calling for an end of this war. That needs to intensify. And I think it will.